Welcome back to the Beautifully Complex podcast. I am so super excited to have Dr. Richard Selznick here with me, who I have been following for years for my own instruction and learning and my own kid. And so I'm really excited to have him here on the podcast to talk to us about power struggles and shutdown learners and all of the good, wonderful wisdom that he has to share. Will you start, Dr. Selznick, just by introducing yourself? Let all of us know who you are and what you do.
Sure, Penny. Thanks for inviting me on. I'm excited to be here. So
Yeah.
we appreciate you been following me all these years, and I didn't
Mm.
think I don't know if I knew that.
Mhm.
Not sure if I knew it. I'm a psychologist. I've been the head of the Cooper Learning Center for a number of years. I specialized in kind of this somewhat niche psychologist. I think of myself like, you know, I've had this specialty in dyslexia and reading, and learning disabilities, but you can't help it, which is tied into, I think, what you followed over the years, where there's a kind of package where it's not just reading, it's reading and then this and that, reading and behavior, ADD comes into play, and then the power struggles come in. So that's kind of what I do. Parents come to me when they're worried about their kid. That's bottom line. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of it. They want advice and they want guidance, and it can be very, very challenging for parents, as I'm sure you appreciate.
Mhm.
And my mission, and hopefully comes through in the books and the blogs, and as I'm talking to you, is to really talk to parents. Mostly it's the moms, but talk to parents in down to earth, plain language.
Mhm.
There's a lot of confusion out there about special ed and IEPs and 504s, dyslexia. There's just tremendous confusion. And then, of course, people will go on social media and they'll try to get more advice. So I try to cut through that. That's really my mission, to cut through things and to talk to you as a parent as straightforwardly as I know how to talk to you,
Mhm.
and to be as honest as I know how to be. Because I just don't find that the parents are getting that as much as I think they should. So that's why.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was why I think your work resonated with me because it was kind of boiled down to the nitty gritty, right? You were just
Yeah.
giving the information that we really needed. And sometimes it was the truth that nobody else was necessarily willing to give, right? Which is something I've also focused on in my work is let's be honest about this because if I go to a therapist and I get information about my kid who's struggling and
Hmm.
then I go home and none of it works or it seems too hard to implement or and then I feel bad about myself. I think it's me. And so we
It,
have to be honest about what's going on.
and it's, as you can appreciate, and as many years as I've been doing this, and I tend to think of it, it's not like what I call, quote, real medicine,
Mm,
or, going to the dentist. I'm not knocking dentistry, but this kind of you know, the certain problems are handled a certain way every time, I would assume.
right. Hmm.
So for me, in my work, it's literally, I'd say child by child, family by family. So, how you come in with whatever your circumstances are, I have to sort of suss it. It's the easiest thing in the world would be to just give a reading test and say, oh, okay, phonics problems, go get tutoring. Well, that's, that's not the way to do an assessment, but I have to kind of feel around the edges, I think, and get a sense of you. If I recommend tutoring, well, what if you can't afford it? What if you don't have the
Hmm.
time for it? What if your husband or you don't, you have one, you don't have, I don't know. There's so many variables that come up.
Yeah.
And then trying to explain that to parents because they want, of course, well, what do we do? They want the answer. And I'm like, oh, I don't know how to give them the answer now. But I do the best thing.
Yeah, and there isn't one answer. That's the first
No,
thing we
there
have to learn
absolutely
as
isn't.
parents. There isn't one
And
answer.
no, there isn't. And one of my standard lines is, a lot of this work sort of depends on whose doorstep you land on. So if you go to the neurologist, you're going to get the problems through the lens of a neurologist, and more often than not, what I have found, they're seeing it through the ADHD lens. And then if you go to some other type of professional, they're seeing it through the audiologist, seeing it through that lens. And you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
you can get 10 different opinions from 10 different professionals.
Yeah.
And that can also be bewildering to parents.
Mhm. I mean, it's a complex thing to have
It really is.
learning challenges or ADHD or
Yeah.
autism. It's so complex, and there are no
Yeah.
easy answers. And I think, that's where, and this was true for myself. I started wanting to fix it, right? I cared about my kid. He was struggling. I wanted to fix it.
How old was your child when you started
He was 6, just turned
sick?
6.
Yeah.
And clearly something was going on. And we had a great teacher come in first grade. The kindergarten wasn't ideal. We switched schools. We had the most wonderful teacher. He had his whole career in first grade, and still there are a lot of problems. And that's when we were like, okay, what's happening here? And we
Yeah.
were able to get evaluations and get diagnoses and, start. But then I was like, okay, how do I fix this? How do I make
Right.
him work for school instead of school work for him, right? Because you don't know better when you start out, and then you have to figure that out.
And and what you just said, in fact, I think that I forget what I've written at this point, but I believe either in my book School Struggles or in Shutdown Learner, the question of how do we fix it? And without sounding negative, basically we don't. And my answer is, well, they're not car engines. They're not broken.
Mhm.
So there's no fixing. But I know I understand what's behind the question,
Yeah.
but that question comes up a whole lot in my work.
Yes.
How do we fix it? And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, how do we fix it? I'm
Me too. Yeah, and
getting
I
that
I
question
talk
a lot.
so much about the fact that that's the wrong question to be asking. You have to shift your
Yeah.
mindset to the questions that are helpful, because that one's not. That one just keeps you stuck.
But yeah.
Let's talk about power struggles. Your new book is Beyond Power Struggles, right?
Yep.
I think that this is born probably from societal pressure, traditional parenting, right? And the first thing we probably have to do is just be able to shift away from that. But I'll let you talk a little bit about, what do you mean by power struggles? Where do we get tripped up?
It's a good question reflecting on some health struggles that came in recently. I think you're right that a lot of this could be generational. And every generation, every 10 years has another view of parenting and how it should be done and how kids should be handled. And, I'm obviously not of a modern generation, let's say. So I think some of this is generational. Um, I think a lot of this came about because I have found, and I don't exactly know why, that kids are becoming more and more challenging when the parents come in to consult with me.
Mm,
They're frequently, the word meltdown comes up. They're having tantrums or having meltdowns. And I'm not talking about in my world, I'm dealing, I know you're involved a fair amount with the autism. It's not as much my world, but you know, when a child is having a meltdown when they're asked to do homework or they're asked to get off of their screens
mhm.
or they're just basically fundamentally uncooperative and parents feel like they're at a loss. And that's kind of the genesis of this type of thing. I've had a lot of, I have an approach, a mindset for parents to try to guide them in terms of how to handle these issues. And again, there are all kinds of theories. I know the current one is gentle parenting. I don't really exactly know what that is, but I have a sense that it's not my approach. Not that I'm advocating for harsh parenting,
Right.
but you know, coaching parents and trying to get them to understand how to talk to the child in a certain way, so the child understands, like, ooh, I better kind of get in the game here and do what my parent is asking me to do. And that's kind of how this book came about. Parents are very beleaguered. They feel very worn down.
Mhm.
But and again, try to give them some support and specific advice on how to handle these things.
Yeah, so do you wanna talk a little bit about sort of those guiding principles that parents can employ to help with that?
Yeah, one of my favorites is I think we saw it in a blog recently to always have a mantra on hand, and
Mhm.
the mantra being to effectively not go down a rabbit hole with the parents. So the mantra would be something like, remind yourself, I'm almost like praying the mantra like way, don't take the bait. Remind yourself, don't take the bait.
Mm,
Don't take the bait. Because, you know, from a kid's point of view, what does a kid want? From my perspective, what they want is pleasure. They want to play on their screens. They want to do what they want to do.
mhm.
And, they don't want to do something they don't want to do. I call it IWIWD or something. I want what I want disorder. You know,
Yeah.
that's the disorder. I want what I want disorder. So the mantra would be something like, don't take the bait. And you're reminding yourself to just not get into a power struggle with a child,
Mhm.
to not bite on their hook. Another piece of advice would be to look at how you're talking to the child. Kids will frequently be, we can't help it. We get our buttons pushed, we take the bait, we start yelling.
Yeah.
And I try to get parents to be a little bit more mindful of anticipating a situation. Like if we're going to a birthday party and the last time you were at the birthday party, you start to grab and push and do whatever. So your child's tendencies. So I call it in the book PPSA, proactive, preventive, strategic approach. Basically, it's proactive. What do I know before going into the birthday party? What's the likely tendency? What are the odds of something happening? So if you know the odds, then you need to talk to the child before it's happening.
Yeah.
So like, let's talk about the last time you went to the birthday party. It didn't go very well. Do you remember why? Well, yeah, I kind of got grabbed. That's right. Well, it's not going to go like that today. It's not going to, here are the rules. I like using phrases like, here are the rules, or this is how it's going to work, or here's the deal. And the child knows up front how it's going to go. And here's the key. I think this is the essential key. It's the child's choice. They could
Mhm.
choose well, or they could choose poorly. And you've laid out, the guidelines, but you would say to the child, listen, if you choose well, then everybody's happy. You get to play in the birthday party and all's fine. If you choose poorly, well, you need to have in your mind as a parent, well, then we need to go sit outside for a while, something like that. You see what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Then
Mhm.
you're losing the privilege of being in that party.
Yeah.
That but it's your choice. I think that we don't allow the child to make the choice. And people have reported back to me that that has really impacted their lives when they recognize that it's the child's choice. It seems on some level obvious, like, oh, this is all common sense. Well, a lot of it is common sense, but it's not as easy to implement as it might seem.
Yeah. And I think so often, especially for neurodivergent kids, because they have the
Mhm.
sense of so little control over what happens to them, that giving choice makes them less anxious. It makes things feel like they're more
Mhm.
in their control and things tend to go better. And, it just really helps. I don't know how else to say, like, it's
Yeah.
really powerful stuff.
And I don't know how you feel about it because I do struggle with neurodivergent kids okay, if I'm laying out this mindset for the parent, and let's say the child has been shown to, well, I'm just using ADHD as an
Mhm.
example, significant ADHD, and I get stuck with, all right, is it within the child's realm of control? To what extent?
Yeah.
And that always becomes like a sticking point for me because
Mhm.
I do set up this model and mostly it works.
Right.
But there are going to be situations where because of the neurodivergent issues,
Mhm.
it might, something else is needed.
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly times where it's not a choice. The behavior is not a choice. they get
Right.
triggered, they get dysregulated, they have sensory processing issues, they're
Right.
overwhelmed. There's a lot of triggers there
Right.
that could make it not a choice, but being proactive and you're talking about it beforehand, and you, the parent, have been watching and you know what the potential triggers are, you can make a plan, you can outline expectations, but, like, I love that you say instead of, like, "We're going home if you don't follow the rules, we're just gonna take a break and we're gonna go outside." That's a compassionate way to do it that honors that maybe it wasn't necessarily a choice, but seeing they clearly need a break from the environment,
I
right?
love that you're picking up on a couple of things there. I like to believe that what you're doing on the front end
Mhm.
is, in a sense, planting a seed in the child's head. When you sit down and talk in a somewhat objective, calm way, to strike while the iron is cold, not while the iron is hot. So while before we go to the party, the last time we went, and then have that discussion, very brief. And then by letting the child know it's not going to happen that way today. And the kid's going, really? Go out. How do you know that? Yeah, I mean, they might be thinking that. I don't know. If, it gets out of hand, this is what we're going to do. And I do agree with you that it allows for, you know, I'm not, timeout's okay. I just think it's overused. To me, it's not even a timeout. It's kind of like, all right, we're going to go out, we're going to go out to the car. The cousin's birthday party that's getting too aggressive or whatever. So we're going to just sit in the car for 5 minutes. And from my point of view, let's say the child's having a meltdown in the car. I don't want to the car.
Mhm.
What's your job as a parent? From my end, the job would be nothing.
Mhm.
Just sit there. Just
Mhm.
read your book, look, do nothing. And in 5 minutes, are you ready to go back in? Again, choice.
Mhm.
Are you ready to go back in? Yes. Okay. How do we want it to go? Well, you don't want me to push it. No, no, no. Right. Brilliant. I like joking with you. Brilliant.
Yeah.
So I'm going to watch. Let the child know that you know, you're not just talking to your sister or something like that and having a drink. You're watching the kid. I'm going to watch. And what's going to happen if, well, what's going to happen if you start pushing again? Well, we go out to the car. Right. So that, but then the next time you go to a birthday party, I would predict, remember how it went the last time?
Mhm.
What are we going to do? The kid will start to really associate mom and dad taking an effective action, giving me choice, and recognizing that my choice has positive consequences built in or negative ones built in, that you don't have to create all kinds of consequences for the parent.
I would add, when we go outside, there are things that we can do that can help a kid get regulated too. So instead of maybe sitting in the car, we walk a loop around the parking lot or,
Yeah.
any sort of regulation
Yeah.
activity that would help to calm their nervous system too, so that they can more successfully go back
Totally
in.
agree. Totally agree. But that's also why I said in the beginning, it's kid by kid, family by family.
Hmm.
If it's a more manipulative type of child who's really trying to push and they can control themselves but are choosing poorly,
Hmm.
then the car may be a boring place to sit. On the other hand, if it's a child who does get overstimulated, like you're suggesting, too much sensory overload, and they, truly can't handle it, and taking a little walk around would be a nice way of settling it all down,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And I think too, reflecting later, if
Mhm.
things went badly, you don't reflect then, you don't try to teach then. I love that you said you just go out there and you sit because what we tend to do is want to fix it again. And so, I call myself the great rationalizer. All I did was try to rationalize my kid out of every behavior, right? I thought if I could just talk him down, right? And it never, ever, ever worked. And it was because he was already overwhelmed. He wasn't processing what I
Yeah,
was just
yeah,
adding to that.
yeah.
And so we teach parents all the time in our behavior program, stop talking. Just stop
Totally,
talking.
Stop.
because it's not
Zip it and
helping.
clip it. Stop. That's another mantra.
Mhm,
Zip it and clip it. Yeah, I'm
mhm,
trying to practice that. I'm now in the zone of being a grandparent,
mhm.
and my kids don't want my advice. You might
Right.
want my advice, but they don't want it, you know? So it's like, so my mantra to myself is zip it and clip it. But I think as a parent, sometimes just stop talking so much. I agree,
Mhm,
you know?
mhm.
They don't want to hear it, but they have choice. So I go back to that, but you're triggering a lot of thoughts. With the debriefing, I also like, especially if the kid's young, let's say 6, 7, 8, 9, sort of tuck in time. That cements, that cements a little bit. Boy, I'm not big on overly, reinforcing. You've got to give all this reward stuff. You know what? I'm really proud of you with the birthday party today. I know it's getting a little out of hand and you totally followed the rules. And I'm really proud of you. I saw what you did and it was great. And I hope we do that the next time. Ah, you know? And if it didn't go so well, it's like, well, next time we'll try to follow the rules better,
Yeah. Or
to
how do
make it,
you want it to go different next
yeah,
time
how
you
do
go
you
to a
want it to
birthday
go?
party,
Exactly.
right? Giving them that control again
How,
because that kid's
how do you want to
sensing.
go? This came up recently, where mom, when it was, had rented, one of those fancy gym places, it's expensive to rent those things.
Yeah.
And she was, it wasn't for even for a birthday. It was just for a treat for her child.
Mm.
And her like 8, 9, 10, whatever, that age range. And in about 5 minutes, the kid got really moody. Like, I don't want to do this. I'm bored.
Mm.
And mom's like, starts getting upset. I spent all this money. Da, 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 da. And, again, giving the kid choice. Listen, Nate, here's the deal. You can choose to be miserable or you can choose to have fun. But if you're going to be, because what the kid wanted, frankly, was to go back and play on his video games. He didn't
Mhm.
want to, he wanted to go on a screen somewhere and he was
Yeah.
bored because he didn't have his phone or something. But if you're choosing to be miserable, your friends can have fun, but you're going to be sitting here, not a punishment, and no screen, no phone, no nothing. And that's your choice again. And I like that fixed it pretty quickly.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, we talk so much here on the podcast about preferred tasks and non-preferred tasks and how hard it is for a neurodivergent brain to really click on to a
Yeah.
non-preferred task. Like, for example, the ADHD brain, it's motivated by interest and urgency, but not really by importance, And so we are like, well, because you got to do homework, that's why, right? But a kid whose brain doesn't just go, "Okay, it's important, I gotta get in here," it's much harder to do that, and so there's neurological reasons for a lot of our kids for things like that too, but they do need to
Right.
be encouraged still to
Yeah.
do things that are not preferred because that's
Well,
life, and
well, as another mantra, well, it's called homework. It's not called home fun.
right. And then for kids who have learning struggles, that's a whole 'nother ball
Well, that's the
game,
shutdown learner stuff
Yeah.
that got you hooked on.
Mhm. They
Oh,
of course, they're not gonna engage if it's that hard, right? If it's
hmm
so non-preferred and difficult, and I might fail at it, why am I gonna try? Like, it's so hard to make yourself
that is, I have a parade of kids that I evaluate who just, you know, frequently the parent or a parent or the teacher will be ascribing ADHD hypotheses or he's just not motivated. And I'm like, yeah, but this kid has severe reading problems, severe, shutdown learner style, can't read very well, significant dyslexia. And that's where it, that would undercut any of our motivation,
Mhm.
and I think that we have to really, as a parent, understand the zone that they're in terms of what they can and can't handle. You know,
Yeah. There's always a reason. We talk about, "Oh, my kid is not motivated. They don't care about doing well in school." Well, why? There's something there we could help with.
you had said something earlier which triggered me, and I think it was when you sort of talked about your own struggles, so to speak, when your child was younger. And,
Mhm.
I think again, I know we can't broad stroke it too much, but the moms, it's been my impression, tend to take it on the burden of, oh, it's my fault. It, you know, I'm doing something I should have been doing something differently or not enough of or whatever. And the focus of these books, including Shutdown Learner and Beyond the Power Stroke, is on the parents, but not because it's your fault,
Mhm.
but it's because you're the one who can reflect.
Yes.
You're like we're doing right now. We're both reflecting and going, okay, that might be an interesting approach, giving the child choice. Or yes, I can back off during homework. The child is generally not in a position to go, oh, let me reflect on what you're saying, Mom.
Right.
It, they don't tend to be that introspective, in my impression.
They haven't had
So,
practice yet. They don't have the skill yet,
no,
right? But we
not mature
do.
enough, right?
We've had the
In
time.
theory, we do.
Mhm.
I'm
And
still working on it myself.
I feel we're all a work in progress.
Yeah,
We
that's
all
true.
have strengths and weaknesses, right?
Right, right.
So, yeah, I um I really think that, understanding what is going on, that's our job. And, we're talking about kids with these kind of struggles, complex kids. It's like 90% us. We are the ones who need to do the work. We are the ones who need to shift our perspective, dig deeper under behavior, have a different approach because our kid is different, right? Or our student is different. And so it's a lot about the work that we need to do as the adult, because we're not changing kids, we're just helping them build skills, find their path, their journey, their version of success, right?
And it has to resonate with you. The advice you're getting has to resonate with you. One of my favorite questions, which I think you'll appreciate, and I have found the answer to this 90, I'm not just saying it to be flattering to parents, but I always ask, what's your mom got? Most of the time, the mom is one coming in to bringing the child in to see me, at least initially. I'm not saying the dad's uninvolved if there is. But what's your mom got? What do you think is going on? And I have found the answer to that almost always to be, in sync with what I find.
Mm,
So if the mom says, you know what, I think he has a reading problem. I don't know what you want to call it. That's his primary issue. And he's a little difficult around the edges. And then I tune all that out and do my assessment. And I'd say 99% of the time, it's that. Every once in a while, I'll get
that
them,
was me.
where the mom gut is like, well, mom, he's really in good shape and he has no issues, that kind of thing. Or there's something much bigger going on. But I think it's important as a parent to remember that, to trust your gut and make sure the advice resonates with you, that it's advice that you're comfortable with.
Yeah. You've given us so much wisdom here. And I hope that everyone will connect with you and learn more, pick up your books.
Thank you.
And we have links to all of that in the show notes. So for
Great.
everyone
Thank you.
listening, you can go to parentingadhdandautism.com/253 for episode 253. And I really hope that you will sign up for the emails. I get one I think it's Friday from you. And they're
Typically Fridays.
always useful. I love them. Really honest, simple insights is how I
Well,
think.
thank you.
And I really enjoy it, and I have for years.
Well,
I
thank you.
hope
I
everybody
really
else does.
appreciate we appreciate your having me on. With the coffee in our cup, we could have continued for hours just kicking this around.
Just about every podcast interview I do, we could
Oh, I thought it was
talk
just
all
me.
day.
It's
It's
just me.
because we're
All right.
so
All right.
passionate about what we do, right? And about kids and helping kids. And it's complex. There's a lot to talk about. But
That's
yeah,
that's correct.
yeah,
That's
it's
right.
so fun to
Yeah.
meet like-minded people and doing
Yeah.
similar work. And it's so great
Well,
to be a
thanks,
helper
Penny.
in the world.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, in the episode, I'll see everybody on the next show.
Thanks. Take care.